100 tons of bananas disappeared into the sands of Africa. Not eaten, not sold, not stolen. Buried by order of the state. And Washington is watching every move, because this act in Burkina Faso threatens more than the desert soil. It threatens billions flowing to fertilizer giants tied to Wall Street. At first, it looks insane. Why destroy food when children go hungry? Why bury bananas when families struggle for bread? Yet President Ibrahim Traoré declared the fruit is no longer just food. It is defiance. It is freedom. It is a weapon against dependency forced by foreign powers, including the United States. For decades, African farmers relied on ships docking in U.S. and European ports. Each bag of fertilizer carried debt, conditions, and invisible chains. But Traoré, a soldier in his 30s, stood before his people and said, "No more." He chose to bury bananas rather than beg for chemicals. He dared to fight not with guns, but with soil. In the Sahel, a banana is more than fruit. It carries potassium, phosphorus, and carbon, the very nutrients missing from exhausted land. When it rots, the soil breathes again. Scientists call it agroecology, but in African news today, it has become a symbol of sovereignty. And that is why America cares. Because if Burkina Faso proves this works, other nations may follow. The fertilizer trade worth billions to Western corporations could collapse. Analysts in Washington whisper, if Africa feeds itself, control is lost. And Wall Street traders already watch for signs. Think about it. A soft fruit, mocked as fragile, may carry the weight of a nation's dignity. A simple burial could spark a revolution in food and freedom. This is not only about bananas. It is about who controls survival itself. So stay with me, because the soil is waking. And if you believe good ground builds strong families, this story will matter to you tonight. It began in early 2025, in the heart of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital. The government announced a strange new project with an even stranger name, Green Pulse. Nobody understood what it meant at first, but soon convoys of trucks rolled through the markets and warehouses. They were not carrying weapons, oil, or even grain. They were loaded with bananas. Some were ripe, some were spoiled, and some came straight from traders who had no place to sell them. In only a few days, 100 tons were collected. The destination was not kitchens or markets, but the desert itself. Under the scorching Sahel sun, soldiers and villagers dug pits into the cracked ground. Into these pits they poured bananas, crate after crate, until the yellow piles vanished under the sand. The scene was surreal. Children laughed as they carried bunches of fruit on their heads. Old women crossed themselves and whispered prayers as they dropped bananas into the earth. Soldiers stood guard, not against enemies, but against doubt. For many farmers, the act felt like madness. "Why bury food when our families are hungry?" they shouted. Traders argued that their goods could have fed children or paid school fees. Families looked on in confusion, asking how life itself could be wasted. But President Ibrahim Traoré insisted this was not waste. It was investment. He declared, "Burkina Faso will not kneel before foreign fertilizer ships. We will feed our soil with what God has already given us." For him, each banana buried was a seed of sovereignty, a declaration that survival could come from within. The government explained the logic. A banana is not only sugar. It is rich in potassium, magnesium, phosphorus, and organic carbon, the very elements missing from Sahel soil. When bananas rot, they release nutrients that strengthen roots, feed microorganisms, and reduce acidity. Instead of chemical bags controlled by foreign corporations, Burkina Faso could use its own discarded fruit. To prove the idea, Test plots were marked in the desert. Villagers watched closely as bananas were buried in neat rows. Some called it planting yellow trees. Others whispered that the government was mocking their hunger. The debate spread quickly across the nation. Was this science or symbolism? Could fruit truly revive dead soil? The operation soon took on the air of a festival. Drums echoed as pits were filled. Teachers brought students to participate, telling them, "Bananas feed the soil. When the soil eats, we all eat." For the first time, children saw fruit not only as food for their stomachs, but food for the land itself. Yet doubts remained. A farmer from the north asked, "We have planted seeds for years and nothing grew. Why should bananas be different?" Others feared the project was political theater, meant to distract from shortages. Opposition leaders accused Traore of playing games while families went hungry. But inside government circles, the stakes were higher than agriculture. Burkina Faso spends hundreds of millions each year importing fertilizer, much of it tied to contracts with Western corporations. Every shipment came with conditions, loan agreements, political pressure, and dependency. By replacing imports with organic waste, the nation could cut its chains. That meant money saved, sovereignty restored, and less power for the corporations that profited from Africa's hunger. And Washington noticed. Reports surfaced that American analysts labeled the project unsustainable and dangerous symbolism. CIA drones circled Sahel skies, officially to monitor insurgent activity, but villagers whispered they were also watching banana fields. Wall Street traders tracked the story too, worried that if Burkina Faso succeeded, agribusiness stocks could suffer. To them, every buried crate was not just fruit, but a potential blow to global profits. Still, the question remained. Was this burial an act of hope or a gamble with hunger? Could bananas really do what scientists promised? As the days passed, eyes across Africa and across the Atlantic in Washington waited for the soil to answer. And then, after 3 long weeks under the brutal Sahel sun, something stirred in the ground. 3 weeks passed. For many, it felt like a lifetime. The sun burned hot, the ground remained dry, and skeptics grew louder. Families whispered, "We buried food for nothing." Traders mocked the soldiers guarding pits of rotten fruit. Some even prayed for rain, desperate for proof. And then it happened. Green broke through the dust. In fields once dead for decades, tiny shoots of millet and sorghum pushed upward. First just a few, then dozens, then rows. Farmers who had nearly given up gathered in disbelief. One farmer named Adama said, "I planted here for 10 years and nothing grew. After the bananas, the soil feels alive. Maybe my children will eat from this land again." State television captured the moment. Cameras zoomed on the fragile sprouts while villagers touched them with reverence. The footage played on repeat across Burkina Faso. The message was clear. This was not madness. This was resurrection. The nation reacted like never before. In schools, children sang songs about feeding the desert. Teachers told their classes, "Bananas are food for the earth, and when the earth eats, we all eat." The phrase spread like fire. On the streets, people began to chant it at rallies. Even soldiers, once skeptical, repeated it with pride. One young soldier, just 22, described his awakening on local radio. "When I first carried crates of bananas into the desert, I thought it was pointless. I am a soldier. My duty is to fight with guns. But when I saw the soil change, when I saw children planting with their hands, I realized this was also war. The war for independence. We bury fruit, but we are sowing freedom." His words spread quickly across the nation, becoming a rallying cry for the younger generation. But beyond Burkina Faso, the reactions were mixed. In Paris, newspapers mocked the project with cartoons of villagers dancing around banana pits. A French anchor joked, "Perhaps next they will bury baguettes." In Washington, the response was colder but just as cutting. Think tanks warned the project was unsustainable and political theater. Reports suggested that Burkina Faso's fragile economy could not risk experiments while hunger persisted. CIA surveillance continued. Farmers in the Sahel looked to the sky and said, "The drones watch our fields as if they are weapons." American media added fuel. On CNN and Voice of America, commentators labeled Traore unstable and a puppet of Moscow. Yet this messaging sparked something unexpected. African Americans on social media pushed back. The hashtag #AfricaIsNotForSale spread quickly, with thousands praising Traore as the man who dared to say no to global powers. One post read, "If CNN hates him, maybe he's doing something right." Meanwhile, Moscow praised the project as an act of strength under sanctions. Russian broadcasters compared it to their own struggles for survival. Beijing stayed quieter, but pointed to their long tradition of using organic waste. Chinese experts suggested partnerships in agroecology. And in Ankara, Turkish media called it dignity in the soil. Most powerful of all were the voices within Africa. In Mali, crowds chanted Traore's name. In Niger, radio shows debated whether their nation could launch a similar project. Memes, once mocking bananas, turned into symbols of pride across Senegal and Guinea. What seemed absurd at first became a movement of hope. And yet, shadows remained. Rumors surfaced that European fertilizer corporations were alarmed. Leaked cables suggested that if Green Pulse succeeded, billions in exports would be lost. Western analysts speculated that bananas were not only for soil but also a cover for hidden strategies, maybe even new biofuel projects. Suspicion grew. Was this only about farming, or was it a silent economic war? The laughter faded, replaced by unease. The world began to ask, if bananas can awaken the desert, what else might they awaken? 6 weeks after the burial, the government released its first official report. The findings were extraordinary. Fields treated with bananas showed a 60% increase in soil fertility. Acidity levels dropped. Microbial life, almost absent before, multiplied threefold. In pilot plots, millet sprouted where dust had ruled for decades. The desert was waking. Villagers saw the change with their own eyes. For years, mothers scraped empty ground, praying for food. Now children walked through rows of young shoots, touching them as if they were miracles. Families spoke of hope returning to dinner tables. One old woman, Mariam, 60 years old, told reporters, "For years I sold bananas for coins. Now I bury them for my grandchildren's bread. Which is the greater wealth?" Her voice cracked with age but carried more weight than any official statement. The government celebrated. State television showed farmers holding their first small harvests in years. Drums echoed in the villages as people realized they had food grown not from imports, but from their own land. It was more than food. It was dignity. But the impact went beyond fields and kitchens. Economists revealed that Burkina Faso spends over $100 million each year importing fertilizers, much of it from Western corporations. By replacing even 30% of that with organic waste, the nation could save millions annually. Those savings could be redirected to schools, hospitals, and defense. For a poor country under constant pressure, this was liberation. And Washington took notice. Wall Street traders watched uneasily as news of soil revival spread. Fertilizer company shares slipped slightly, not because of immediate losses, but because of fear. If one African nation could break free, others might follow. The chain of dependency could crack. Then came a message from former President Donald Trump. On social media, he wrote, "Traore made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay." The words shocked some, but for many in Africa, it confirmed what they already believed, that Western powers saw their survival as a threat. Think tanks in Washington doubled down. Reports argued that green pulse was political theater and could not replace the precision of modern fertilizers. Analysts warned that Burkina Faso was risking starvation for the sake of symbolism. Yet these same reports admitted one quiet truth. If the project scaled, Western corporations would lose billions. Inside Burkina Faso, debate was fierce. Some traders complained their goods were seized. Opposition figures accused the government of hiding corruption behind the banana spectacle. But for ordinary farmers, results spoke louder than politics. Adama, the farmer who once gave up on his land, said, "After the bananas, I see my soil breathe. Maybe my children will not leave this land for the city. Maybe they will stay." That possibility of families staying, of migration slowing, of dignity restored was powerful. For decades, the Sahel had been defined by hunger, aid packages, and exodus. Now people spoke of a future where life could grow again. But the consequences also carried danger. Every hectare revived through bananas meant fewer bags of imported fertilizer. Every shipment canceled meant lost revenue for powerful corporations. European lobbies began pressuring their governments to reconsider aid. Some warned Burkina Faso risked isolation if it continued on this path. The government, however, refused to back down. Ibrahim Traoré stood before the nation and declared, "A nation that feeds its soil feeds its freedom. We will not let our survival be dictated by ships docking in foreign ports." The crowd erupted in applause. To many Africans, his words sounded less like policy and more like prophecy. Yet beyond the cheering, storm clouds gathered, because this was no longer only about farming. It was about sovereignty colliding with global profit. And when sovereignty threatens profit, history shows that pressure follows, sometimes political, sometimes economic, sometimes even violent. The question, now whispered in markets and boardrooms alike, how would America respond if Burkina Faso truly broke free? While villages in Burkina Faso cheered, the halls of Washington grew uneasy. Reports from major think tanks warned, if Project Green Pulse succeeds, Western leverage in Africa collapses. Analysts compared it to a chain reaction. One nation breaks free, others follow. Billions in fertilizer exports could vanish. Wall Street also took notice. Traders tracked every headline, every photo of green shoots in the Sahel. Shares of fertilizer companies wavered, and whispers spread that global agribusiness might face its first real challenge from Africa. Not from guns, not from sanctions, but from bananas. The U.S. intelligence community paid close attention. Villagers reported American drones circling the skies, officially to monitor insurgents, but farmers joked, "They watch our bananas as if they were missiles." For them, it was proof that Washington feared more than soil. It feared sovereignty. American media weighed in. CNN and Voice of America called Traore unstable and reckless. Commentators suggested he was a puppet of Moscow. Yet, the reaction backfired. African Americans on social platforms rallied behind Traore, launching the hashtag #AfricaIsNotForSale. Thousands shared messages praising him as the young leader who dared to say no. For many in America's black community, his defiance echoed struggles for dignity at home. Meanwhile, Paris laughed. Headlines mocked a banana republic, literally. Cartoonists drew villagers dancing around pits of fruit. But Moscow took a different tone, praising Traore as a man who turned weakness into strength. Russian state media declared, "They laugh because he refuses to beg." But history remembers those who create from nothing. Beijing was quieter but approving, pointing to China's own history of using organic waste to restore land. Ankara praised it as dignity in the soil, an African solution born from culture, not foreign dictates. And across Africa itself, the reaction was electrifying. Crowds in Mali chanted Traore's name as if he were their own president. Radio hosts in Niger debated launching similar projects. Memes in Senegal transformed from jokes into badges of pride. What the West mocked, Africans embraced. But as support grew, so did suspicion. Could the United States allow such defiance to spread? Or would it strike back, economically, politically, even covertly? The world began to ask a larger question. Was this only about bananas and soil, or was it the first crack in a much greater wall of dependency? The soil has spoken. From 100 tons of buried bananas came new life in the Sahel. Families who once watched empty fields now see green shoots rise. Children laugh where dust once choked the air. For Burkina Faso, it is hope. For the world, it is a warning. Because every hectare revived without imported fertilizer is a loss for powerful corporations. Every shipment not purchased is profit denied to Western markets. Leaked reports already show European lobbies pressing their governments to cut aid if Burkina Faso continues. And in Washington, whispers grow louder. What if Africa no longer needs us? History teaches us that independence is never free. Pressure will come. Economic sanctions, disinformation, even covert sabotage. Already, media outlets label Project Green Pulse a stunt, a dangerous dream. But beneath the mockery lies fear. Fear that Africa may no longer bow. Fear that sovereignty may bloom from the soil. The question now is not whether bananas can heal the land. That answer is already clear in the fields. The question is whether the world will allow Africans to control their own survival. Will Ibrahim Traoré be remembered as the hope of African independence, or as the threat to a Western order built on dependency? And here, Americans must also reflect. Because this story is not only about Burkina Faso. It is about values. It is about dignity, justice, and the right of families to live free from control. If a poor nation can find strength in spoiled fruit, what excuse do richer nations have for forgetting their founding principles? So tonight, think about it. Pray for the farmers who bury fruit so their children may one day eat bread. Tell this story at your dinner table, because stories carry truth further than weapons. And share it, not as politics, but as a reminder that freedom begins in the soil beneath our feet. Because if bananas can wake the desert, perhaps they can also wake the conscience of the world.